Here we are, the third week of January 2021, and I still haven't wrapped up the Pacific Northwest tour, so I'm going to do that with this episode and give you a little bit of a review of the DoubleTake Mirrors that we used on both the 800 and on the 1200 here, and how they performed for our trip and since then as well. So that coming up on this episode of UTADV. In the last episode on the Pacific Northwest tour, I talked about our morning at Glacier National Park, and really more specifically at Lake McDonald, because we really didn't take the time to go up that highway and go through the whole park in its entirety. And I regret not doing that, but I was pressed by the idea that we had a motorcycle that might be compromised. I didn't know how long the JB Quick Weld would hold on the radiator. And I just kind of felt compelled to move on. And I guess in retrospect, it was a good decision to make, because by the time we got to Yellowstone, the following day we encountered some problems. But from Glacier National Park, then we made our way down through Montana. Just a spectacular ride. We came through Helena, where we stopped and had lunch, and then made our way onto West Yellowstone. And I don't have any pictures. I don't have anything from that, because I was just kind of determined to make sure that we got to our next location safely and to minimize the amount of starting and stopping as far as the 800XC was concerned. So we got into West Yellowstone, and we circled around and looked for, again, kind of a remote campsite. And despite the COVID conditions, everything was just jammed, packed full of people. And it started to get dark, and by that time we decided to land in another KOA just outside of West Yellowstone, where we struck camp. We met a couple of other BMW ADV riders as well. And we had our favorite, the only picture I took was of our favorite meal and our favorite beverage there. It's the Mountain House Stroganoff, the beef stroganoff, and Blue Moon. And retired for the evening, had a relatively okay night's rest there at that KOA. It was just incredibly busy. I've never seen that many people on a campground in all my journeyings and all my trips, but nonetheless. So the next morning we got up, got breakfast, and got on the bikes, and not less than a half a mile out of the KOA onto the highway that goes into West Yellowstone, the Triumph, the 800XC lost its hose, the place where we had fixed it with a JB Quick Weld, and had sprayed hot coolant all over the trousers, the left trouser leg on Addie there. And she let me know in our Senna headset that that's what was going on. So we pulled over, took a look, and sure enough, it was hemorrhaging coolant. So we rode back to our campsite. We left a little early, and I figured I paid for the campsite up to 11 o'clock. So we went back to that campsite, and I tore into the Tiger again, let everything dry off and cool down, and did one more coat of JB Quick Weld, and sat there and let it dry. And it was at that point where I started to think, okay, how close are we getting back to our home in Bountiful to go through and wrap up the trip? And in looking at that, I realized I was really closer than I had thought. And at that point, we decided to push our way back home to Bountiful, where at least then I wouldn't have to worry about trying to trailer or haul the Tiger back that way if it didn't make it. And fortunately for us, we made it all the way back without a hitch back to Bountiful. And the only pic I have of that is this one of the two Tigers back in the barn. Despite how the trip ended, it was nice to be home. This place was in full bloom in June, and it was nice to have a warm shower and a nice place to sleep and have a meal or two. We spent a couple of days here kind of decompressing, and then Addie got on a plane and flew back to Monterey, and a couple of days after that, I got back on this Tiger and drove back to Monterey to pick up my truck and my trailer that we had left there when I brought the 2 motorcycles out to begin the trip. And that was a great trip as well. I had an opportunity to take some back roads over the Sierras and into the Central Valley of California, and then over to Monterey. And I really enjoyed myself. And it was kind of weird being a solo rider again. I had a habit of checking my mirrors constantly, but eventually I got beyond that. And I got into just kind of settling in and riding on my own, which is, I really enjoy that. I like being that lone rider, not anything against riding with my spouse or riding with Addie. I've always enjoyed that, would love to do that again, but it was interesting to be back on my own. So a while back when I was doing the upgrades on the Triumph Tiger 800 XE, I did Puig brake levers and SW Motec handguards on that. I also decided to pull the stock mirrors off that one and replace them with the DoubleTake breakaway mirrors, which use a ram mount that way, and then the ram mounts clamp onto that little ball, and then they go up to the mirrors themselves, and they're much more adjustable than a stock mirror would be that way. And in first riding the Triumph Tiger, I really enjoyed having just my mirrors a little farther out, gave me a little bit better vision behind me, better than my stock mirrors were. But the true test of these came when we were riding on the Pony Express Trail, where Addie had the mishap with the Tiger and barrel rolled it on a dirt surface at about 30 miles an hour. And as the bike went upside down, it is inverted, it smashed both of those stanchions down the DoubleTake mirrors. It took them right down to the handlebars. But once we got the bike uprighted, and you can see in the pics, the first thing I did was I put the mirrors back in the position. And while they were scraped up considerably, they took the full punishment of that rollover. And I was thinking about replacing them, but no, I decided to stick with the ones that I'd put on there. They fared beautifully with that type of accident that we had. And I since bought a pair to put on the 1200 as well. And that's what we used during the Pacific Northwest tour. They're still on the bikes. I'll keep them on the bikes because they work out really well. Nice and adjustable. My main concern, and one concern that I see with people who are looking into these DoubleTake mirrors, is that, well, do they come loose? Does the wind blow them? Do they? And you know what? They're just as solid as my stock stanchions were. So I don't have any issues with that. So coming up on the next edition of UTADV, I'm planning another trip. This one will be in June again when I'm done with my semester at school. And I'm going to make a ride from Banfield, Utah down through southeastern Utah into New Mexico and into Texas and down to the southernmost tip of Texas. It's about a 1,500-mile ride going down that way. And I'm going down there to visit my daughter, Addie, there. And then after a couple of days or 3, I might make my way back on a different leg. And I haven't really planned that part out yet, but we'll talk about that and get into some other gear reviews for UTADV. So until then, keep that shiny side up, and the routine as far as liking and sharing, all that kind of stuff. Would appreciate your coming along for the subsequent rides that we'll have here on UTADV. My name is Eric Young. Thanks for joining me.